welcome to the Humanities 101 course, which is being reborn this morning after an interval of 20 years. And we are so happy that this is taking place, that our rector, our former rector, our provost, many faculty members are here, because this is a very exciting new beginning for us. And you will find out that this course will make a difference in your life. Bir ders aldım, hayatım değişti diyeceksiniz. Because here you will be exposed to aspects of culture which you have probably never been exposed to in your school lives before. And for our initial lecture, this most important lecture, we have Professor Cemal Kafadar from the History Department of Harvard University, no less. May I turn the field over to you?
Greetings. Let me begin by saying
for the conclusion. Everything goes down.
Anyway, let me begin by saying it's a great honor for me. Honestly, I consider it my honor to be opening this great venture of my colleagues here at Boğaziçi University, the university of my heart for all times. And I consider it a particular honor to address you, some distinguished guests, and even more distinguished first-year students. In my opinion, this is all for you, and I don't think it's simply my opinion. I really hope that you will benefit from the course. I will just try to give you a few tips and ideas as to what I think such a course in the humanities ought to imply, how one ought to approach it, etc. And I also appreciate the fact that you are all here, given the unfortunate timing of 1 week school, then 10 days of a break with the Bayram. I heard that many schools, many universities started with less than half full classes, even last week. So I appreciate the fact you are here. Thank you. Now, what is the use of a course like this, I thought, when I was preparing my comments, and how should you approach it? How would I approach it if I were in your place? Several entries in Ekşi Sözlük refer to humanities courses at different universities, of course in Turkey, as either işkence, torture, or they look back at the courses, usually many years after they have taken those courses, with some serious nostalgia. Depends on what you really make with it, ultimately. You can approach the course in one of two ways, as far as I am concerned, and this is like the mythical beast in the collection of mythical beasts of Woody Allen. I don't know if you ever read that one. He speaks about the mythical beast. One of the mythical beasts in his book is a lion, which has the head of a lion and the body of a lion, but the head and the body are not of the same lion. So you can make with this course something like a course in broadening your encyclopedic information. Genel kültür, as one says in that wonderful Turkish phrase. You can approach it as a course in genel kültür, and that you might find very useful for you, very beneficial, work hard at it, and you may enjoy that too. There's nothing wrong in and of itself in that approach, but it's extremely limited, and it may eventually, especially if your heart is not in it, turn into işkence, as some of the authors of Ekşi Sözlük have described it. Or, to turn to the body of the beast, you can make it into a means for personal development, for empowering yourselves to question various givens about life in general, but definitely about university education, about what you will be having, what you will be exposed to in your classes. In other words, you can use this course to develop tools and implements that you will acquire and sharpen here in this course, and then you will and tools and implements that you will eventually apply to all sorts of other areas of learning, not just in your classes. The course description says that it is designed to introduce students to cultures East and West. There's some mixture of both in the syllabus I've seen. Ancient and modern, which have over time impacted and interacted with their own culture, namely with your own culture, and thus to encourage critical reflection on this wide cultural heritage. Critical reflection is a key word here, and I'll say more. With emphasis on philosophy, literature, arts, political thought, science, and religion. That's a tall order. Philosophy, literature, arts, political thought, science, and religion. But all of that with a historical perspective, I hope. And obviously, I speak as a historian. Excuse me, but I really have to. As I said, all of that, whatever parts you do, whatever components you cherish and go along with of that tall order, I assume, I imagine, I hope you will approach with a historicizing attitude. What do I mean by that? And I have to talk about that a little bit. You must learn to avoid, in other words, essentializing an ahistorical thinking. Long words, but you also have to come to terms with the fact that in order to discuss some sophisticated, some interesting, some empowering and enriching notions, you will have to learn, you will have to confront some long words. And please do not fall into the trap which I see in many circles in Turkey, in the United States, wherever I have taught courses, of not using dictionaries or using dictionaries only by the force of the gun. Please make peace as early as you can in your training with dictionaries and with some long words as they are called for in debating, discussing, as I said, enriching, analyzing, etc. Still in yourselves in this course. First of all, we have to reconcile ourselves to the simple truth that there is no simple truth in history. I will come back to this point again, but do not expect bottom lines necessarily. And on the historicizing attitude, I should emphasize the approach that I would like to instill, especially when people speak about civilizations, and that is an attitude toward which you have to be very critical. That is a totalizing and essentializing attitude of the sort, for instance, Christianity endorses celibacy while Islam does not. Okay, to some degree one could start with this statement, but immediately for a historicizing attitude you have to ask when, where, who, all of them, all of the social classes, both men and women, both in Europe and say in Christian Ethiopia, And among Muslims, what about the Bektaşis, who, as some of you probably know, have encouraged in certain segments of their order an attitude of celibacy? What about the very famous medieval mystic Rabia, one of the most important mystics ever, mystical figures, one of the most important mystical figures ever, Rabia Adeliyeh? What about her? She married, yes, but she insisted that she would maintain it as a platonic marriage. You may think it's a silly attitude, but nonetheless, I'm here right now talking about the kind of totalizing, essentializing view of civilizations that is so rampant that you really need to guard yourself against. Back to the point about there being no simple truth in history. Living in Turkey in particular, or having been exposed to, having had access to many dimensions of Turkish culture, as some of you are probably not Turks, but have been exposed to dimensions of Turkish culture in various ways. You have probably heard of many statements like the Ottomans were, the Turks were, da. Okay, yes, the Ottomans were, and now I speak as an Ottomanist, which is not necessarily a matter of ideological persuasion, but you might call it a professional deformity. And as an Ottomanist, it is unavoidable for me, but to see that the Ottomans were among the most tolerant in history, but they enjoyed slaves. There was, not as common as in the forms of chattel slavery in ancient Roman society or in the south of the United States of America, but there was widespread use of slavery in especially households. The Ottomans were conquest-minded and warlike, not more than their neighbors, certainly not, but they did have that dimension to them. But at the same time, they knew how to build, they knew how to make peace, and they knew how to establish something that we now look back and call Pax Ottomanica, for good reason. Many Turks were forced into Islam, and many took to it like milk to chocolate. These issues are very hard to debate in Turkey. There are rampant generalizations, which I call essentialism and totalizing. But you ought to be open to debating all of these variant positions, and believe me, whichever side you take eventually, you will find that there are many good, credible pieces of evidence for the other side as well. And that is why you have classes. That is why we have debate. Many Turks are descendants of those who came from Central Asia. Yes, that's our national narrative, which we comfortably insert ourselves into usually, and here I speak as an Ottomanist and a Turk. Many Turks are descendants of those who came from Central Asia, and many are descendants of converts. In fact, most, by far, the overwhelming majority are descendants of both. And here, let me read to you a couple of passages about the Ottoman identity, which we now also speak about as the past of the Turkish identity. And these are just illustrations of the larger points I'm trying to make. I'm not necessarily trying to give you a lecture on Ottomanism, but I'm trying to, once again, underline certain things I alluded to in the beginning about essentialisms. Here, an Ottoman author who himself, in the year 1600, recognized, not only recognized, but cherished the fact that the people who eventually came to be called Ottomans and Turks came from those dual backgrounds that I just mentioned. He sounds not only, he is speaking not only in recognition of that fact, as I said, but also cherishing it. Those varied peoples and different types of Turks living in the glorious days of the Ottoman dynasty are not separate from those tribes of Turks and Tatars who came from the east, and are a select community and pure, pleasing people who, just as they are distinguished in the origins of their state, are singled out for their piety, cleanliness, and faith. Proud, you might say, even chauvinistic. Apart from this, most of the inhabitants of the lands of rule, meaning Anatolia and the Balkans, most of the inhabitants of Anatolia and the Balkans are of confused ethnic origins. Among its notables, there are few whose lineage does not go back to a convert to Islam, either on their father's or on their mother's side. The genealogy is traced to an infidel. It is as if two different species of fruit-bearing tree mingled and mated. Look how we appreciate the aesthetics of that mating and mingling. It is as if two different species of fruit-bearing tree mingled and mated with leaves and fruit, and the fruit of this union was large and filled with liquid, like a princely pearl. The best qualities of the progenitors were then manifested and gave distinction either in physical beauty or in spiritual wisdom. Very, very proud, but not exactly in the same way that we today speak about the Turkish past or Turkish identity with pride. You may disagree with Ali, the author I just cited, and would much rather stand by our modern current notions. That's fine. But you ought to be aware that if you want to historicize this notion of a national identity, in the past there have been people who thought of it differently. There is another quote about the same issue that is my favorite, actually, and this comes from a Hungarian in the 17th century who lived for many years in Istanbul, and he found that the Europeans who kept writing about the Turks are this, the Turks are that, and that usually implied negative, warlike, cruel qualities and things of that sort. The Hungarian took issue with that. He said, I lived amongst them for many years and I learned their language very, very well. And if you ask me about what the Turkish character is, this is a most difficult question. And now I quote him. This is a most difficult question, since it is not one nation but consists of all sorts of people of the world. Germans, Poles, Rus, meaning Ukrainians here, Cossacks, Serbs, Bulgarians, Albanians, Abkhazians, Georgians, Kurds, Persians, Arabs, Greeks, Armenians, Tatars, Wallachians, Moldavians, Circassians, Croatians, Italians, Jews, Indians, and many others. Whoever wishes to speak about the Ottoman character, he must know the character of all these people. Those who are born Muslim have different customs than those who have been converted from Christianity. There are also sociological differences. The educated have their way, the uneducated theirs. People of the frontiers develop different customs than those who are born in the central lands of the empire. Everyone learns both good and bad things from Christians and other neighbors. Again, you may find this disagreeable, but in the 17th century, from the point of view of one well-steeped, knowledgeable observer, the Ottoman/Turkish identity was characterized as such. And we have to come to terms with this. We have to open ourselves, in other words, to historicizing, to thinking historically about all those units that seem so stable, so fixed. Christianity, Islam, Turks, educated people, uneducated people, societies with writing, societies without writing. All of these distinctions and all of these analytical units are useful, but up to a degree, unless you ask the questions like when, where, everybody, but among which segments of society, in which parts of the world, in which parts of the Islamic world, etc., etc. Now, to move away from Ottoman history, which I had to do, right? I had to represent my field, the stuff I have been doing for nearly 30, 35 years now. Historicizing is much more than just talking about civilizations and all that. I'm sure there are some here, there are many probably, who are scientists or aspiring to be scientists. And lately, of course, studies on such matters as, such subjects as the brain or sensory perception have also come to appreciate historicity, have also come to appreciate the fact that even our biological makeup, even various elements of what we consider to be the most fixed, because natural, has a history, has been changing. For instance, about the brain. Respectable biological opinion now has it that the human brain is a social organ, that it evolved in the Pleistocene, which I had to look up myself. See, it's a long word. I have no idea. It's capitalized. It's intimidating. Capitalized words seem to be, particularly intimidating. Pleistocene with a capital P. I have no idea. So I looked up. Originating about 1 million years ago, characterized by widespread glacial ice and by the appearance of man. Okay, good enough? So, back to the brain. The brain is a social organ, we hear. That it evolved in the Pleistocene under the pressure of maintaining a relatively extensive, complex, and solitary set of social relationships, which in all probability included non-human persons. And that's a reference to the fact that many cultures, especially outside the modern Western cultures or the cultures that have in the last 2 centuries taken shape around its orbit, it's a reference to the fact that many cultures consider non-human forces of nature, animate or inanimate, as part of the social environment of human beings. Some even attribute to them humanity, which is worth remembering when we speak about humanities and the social sciences, especially in an age when the main anxiety of humankind has to do with the environment, when we are concerned with the destruction of the forces of nature, animate or inanimate. It might be worth remembering that most of humanity, for much of history, has considered what we call non-humans as part of the larger set of social relationships, meaning animals, plants, and even inanimate beings. Things with a soul, things with a character, things with motivation. Things can appear in our dreams because they have personhood, etc. So that broader notion of humanness should also be with us to some degree, but the brain certainly developed for the last million years in a solitary set of social relationships, which in all probably included those non-human persons that I just spoke about. Symbolic capacity was a necessary condition of this social capacity. What are some of the consequences of this? Today we use less and we use more of our mental capacity than many of our forebears. It is not simply a linear development from, say, using 1% of the brain, now we have moved up to 5%. Well, to some degree this may also be true, but at the same time, developing within certain cultural structures and orientations and whatnot, we do lose certain mental capacities. We use both less and more because the use of the brain and various other biological capabilities has to do with the cultural matrix over, of course, long terms. Some of you may have heard about the great anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss. Anyway, he was one of the giants, one of the towering figures of the social and the human sciences in the 20th century. Much debated. My own kind of history, just a footnote, developed in reaction to his structuralism. So I'm not really like embedded in his ideas or anything, but he's a giant, he's a towering figure, as I said, and the name is the same, of course, Lévi-Strauss, as in the genes. So when he was teaching at Berkeley one year, he had been, he invited some friends to a restaurant. So he made a reservation under his own name. He went to the restaurant, he announced that he'd arrived, looking up, Lévi-Strauss, the receptionist must have taken Humanities 101. She looked up and said, oh, the anthropologist or the genes? So, Lévi-Strauss, who talks about the use of the brain and the mental capacities over time within certain cultural matrices, writes, for example, we use considerably less of our sensory perceptions. When I was writing the first version of my book, such and such, I was confronted with a problem which to me was extremely mysterious. It seems that there was a particular tribe which was able to see the planet Venus in full daylight. Something which to me would be utterly impossible and incredible. I put the question to professional astronomers. They told me, of course, that we don't. But nevertheless, when we know the amount of light emitted by the planet Venus in full daylight, it was not absolutely inconceivable that some people could. This is just a probability yet. But Lévi-Strauss is a good researcher. Later on, I looked into all treatises on navigation belonging to our own civilization. Now he's talking of the Judeo-Christian Islamic civilization. He looked at some treatises on navigation from the 11th century to the 15th century, before the discoveries were made, really. And it seems that sailors of old were perfectly able to see the planet Venus in full daylight. This, within less than a millennium, in the history of the civilization that we all consider ourselves a part of. A loss of a kind of sensory perception due to developments that may have enhanced our capacity to use the brain, but at the same time, there are a few losses. It is not a simple linear story. That's another aspect of historicizing that I would like to impart, if I can, on this first day. When you think about history, please avoid thinking about linearity as a necessary component of historical development. When things go up, things may also be going down. When things go right, things may also be going wrong. When things are gained, things may also be being lost. By the way, is there anyone here from Bursa? Even others, but definitely those from Bursa know the Yeşil Cami. This is a very difficult thing to answer, but forget the name, forget everything you know about the place. Conjure up, if you can, the image of Yeşil Cami. Who was it here among the students? What color does it look to you? Honestly. Can you remember it? I've done the test with people, the short of it.
Gray.
Interesting. I've done the test with many people who had never seen Bursa, who had never seen Yeşil Cami. I've taken friends, Turks and non-Turks, to Bursa on many occasions for various trips I like to take. And this test I always do with them. Look at this building, what color is it? 80% of the time they say blue. It looks blue. To me too. But Short of it is, even our notion of colors, and I've done much more research after it regarding this, which started with the question of what did we call kahverengi before coffee? Because working on the history of coffee, I discovered that no part of the world was really familiar with coffee until the 15th century, and mostly it's after the 16th century. Or in Greek, they call it kafe, right? So in many other cultures, not in English, that's why I gave the example from Turkish. In English, brown doesn't do the same thing. So kahverengi, it turns out that there was really not one simple equivalent of kahverengi. That the scale of colors in which we speak, but also in which we look at the world, changes in history. The scale itself has historicity. Things that we consider natural, I was trying to point out, and this is yet another example, and an example that might mean more to you because of the Yeşil Cami example. Things that we consider so fixed, so natural, biological, it's part of our makeup, have their own historicity within memorable times. We don't have to speak about millions of years, though that too is worth considering. Now, questions of meaning regarding the historicity or the historicizing attitude that I think we ought to maintain vis-a-vis all aspects of the human sciences. I've already said enough. The other point I would like to make, the other point that I would like to insist on, and I'm sure many of you are already aware of it, is that here, namely in the fields called the humanities, constituting the humanities, we are dealing with meaning. We are dealing with interpretation and meaning. Human sciences are most usefully conceived as efforts to render various matters which are on their face value strange and puzzling. Not so, namely, not so difficult, not so strange, not so puzzling, through an interpretive effort. The human sciences are nothing if they are not interpretively oriented. It is not simply a matter of learning things that add up to generality. To come back to the points I started with. Okay, Istanbul was conquered by Mehmet the Conqueror in 1453, and it's very good to know that. But you can look it up too, you know. The much more important thing is to try and interpret what some people call the fall of Constantinople and what some people call the conquest of Constantinople was all about. And it meant different things to many different peoples, of course. And it thus falls upon us to try and understand a few different perspectives on this so as to be able to develop our own interpretive take on 1453. Again, I'll give you a couple of examples or make a few more concrete points about this. This time, looking again at the areas that we consider generally within the realm of the natural sciences or the applied sciences: environment, nutrition, health, infrastructure. Now, to a large degree, obviously, these are matters of technical expertise and sound management. Engineering, economics, administrative sciences, fine, excellent. But they are also matters of philosophy and ethics. And in that respect, natural science cannot be divorced from the humanities and its interpretive efforts. Every fact and everything, take a bridge. Bridge came to me because I guess there is a discussion about a third bridge in Istanbul. But we could take any other infrastructural development. A hospital which looks on the point of politics and ethics so readily accepted, so wonderful that there is no reason to question it. But all elements of the environment, nutrition, health, infrastructure, as worked on by the natural and the applied sciences, once they become part of our human lives, mean something. And that meaning cannot be treated as already there, waiting to be excavated through a mechanical procedure of archaeology. That meaning is there, the bridge, we know what that means, we can just go and excavate it. Bridges, roads, hospitals, they all mean something. Aesthetically at least, and that too goes beyond engineering. They are not merely carriers of some social function, which may be the most important thing to know about them, but they are also carriers of social meaning. And meaning in a real complex society is always contested, debated, conflictual, and hence also political. There is no apolitical engineering. Hence, even if you are dead certain that all you ever really want to be is an engineer, you need the analytical skills of the humanities. You need the interpretive capabilities that I hope you will be developing by being exposed to, by engaging with the humanities. And these are all the more important in our own day. Need I stress the point about the environmental changes? For the first time since the Neolithic, since the Agrarian Revolution, and this one I knew, I didn't have to look it up. It's part of the historian's toolkit to talk of the Neolithic Revolution, which is, say, 10,000 years ago, to put it very short. The Agrarian Revolution. For the first time since the Agrarian Revolution, urban populations have outstripped agrarian and pastoralist ones. Namely, in your lifetimes, some momentous change has taken place that we generally do not speak about. There are more people living in the cities in the world for the first time in the last 10,000 years, and there were no cities to talk about before than India. There are more people living in the cities than there are in the countryside. This has, and this is of course moving in the same direction very rapidly as we speak. It seems facile and chic to make fun of peasant societies and their values. Köyler, ne olacak, etc. Recent Turkish slang is full of that. Okay, if you wish. But it is social formations that were rooted or derived their main livelihood directly or indirectly out of a peasant substratum, even Ottoman Istanbul or Abbasid Baghdad or Louis XIV's Paris, which were major urban centers, drew their livelihood directly or indirectly from a peasant substratum. Period. Whatever the urban formations before our era, that's where the production, that's where most of the population was. And that is what is changing. Those societies, those kinds of societies had developed notions of generosity and kindness, respect for others, preferences for war and peace, hostility or accommodation. There may be a good deal that you find objectionable in this, fine, but it's disappearing and we don't know exactly how we shall move from here. There is no obvious roadmap. There is a very clear need for recalibration of values and sentiments and approaches that have been in the making for 10,000 years at least. But what kind of a recalibration that will be is really up to us. And in all that too, I think, I hope, a good, serious engagement with the human sciences will help. It is not simply a matter of the abstract, or rather the external environment, namely. It is also a matter of the kinds of changes we are living through constitute a matter of profound changes in the environment. There is regular discussion of that and a big public awareness of that. But there is also, it also implies profound changes in the kinds of values, approaches to life that have been formed, that have been evolving, and in that respect too, we need to develop our awareness. And ultimately, the two things cannot really be separated from one another. Whatever we do with all of this, it cannot be done without the analytical skills of the humanities and good historical thinking. I have to watch the time. Okay. So, how is this course constructed? How does it look to me? How should you approach it? These are also big questions. I have the luxury of not having had to organize the course. I can look at it very critically. And the first thing that comes to mind is to question what we might call the canon. I knew what that meant, but I looked it up. And by the way, I looked it up in order to find the best definition for using in this class, and I looked it up in several dictionaries. Please do not underestimate the fact that there are many dictionaries. They provide different things, different goods. And if you turn to more than one, I think you'll find it to your benefit. The canon, the notion of the canon, comes from church history. Like many of our modern notions, European church history, canon, first entry in the dictionary, and ecclesiastical rule or law enacted by a council or other competent authority. Fine. But as you go down the list, you reach the important definition for our concerns, which is any officially recognized set of sacred books. Okay, we're not talking of sacred books here necessarily, though there are some, like selections from the Quran and the Bible. For those of you who may have had training in basic Islamic sciences, the Kütüb-i Sitte, the 6 established books of hadith, the 6 authoritative hadith collections are a canonical collection. It's the same kind of notion. And finally, any comprehensive list of books within a field. For years now, in many countries, especially in the West, there have been heated debates about the need for or the role of a canon of great books that define one's civilization. Who selects those books, people have been asking? By what criteria? To instill or impose what kinds of values? Or you may have heard of the phrase, we always have to read the books of dead white men, which was one of the slogans of early feminism and feminist reactions to the idea of the canon, which is not to be belittled. There have been all sorts of critical perspectives, in other words, that developed in the last few years toward the whole idea of establishing a canonical set of books which every educated person must read. At first, the reaction to the idea of the canon was primarily or merely negative, and tried to get rid of all such approaches to canonical collections that had become part of education, especially in Western universities. But then, in the last 20 years, this debate has been taking place. A recalibration, and ince ayar, has again taken place. It is not so much the books that are selected that we should question. It is, the new attitude seems to be, it is not so much the books that are selected or the whole idea of selecting a few books that ought to be under question. It is rather how we approach them and what we do with them. a few years ago, there was a debate about, in the United States, where I spent most of my life, there was a debate about gay interpretations of ancient Greek classics. There were many who objected to that. And ultimately, some very conservative classicist, a scholar of the classics, himself rather conservative by political attitude, wrote a piece that provided the consensus for many at least, in which he said, look, these classics are nothing if they are not regularly exposed to new readings, critical readings. Some of them will be right, some of them will be wrong, but these classics are not classics if they simply sit on the shelves and are occasionally read because somebody wants to enhance one's social standing by citing a few words from Plato or Aristotle. These are classics because they are regularly exposed to interpretive effort by all sorts of concerns that appear in society from various new angles. It's just part of life. Live with it. About the idea of canon, there is a little couplet, very clever couplet from Küçük İskender, now that I mentioned gay interpretations, which I think goes to the heart of the issue. He says, Edip Atilla Nazım, her eve lazım. Canonization can make the best poets, artists, philosophers look stale, boring, imposed, and hence objectionable. But we do not have to think of them as sealed and put on a pedestal, removed from the dirt of everyday life and its lesser arts. First of all, you have to think. I already mentioned that you have to approach them critically, reread them with new questions, new approaches. But you also have to think of them as existing in a continuum with pulp fiction, with B-movies, with kitsch, with mediocre art, etc. All the way to everything spoken or communicated through some symbolic structure. There are moments in all of those media that can also make you wonder, understand, enable you to rise above the humdrum and the mediocre. They offer different sorts of pleasures. You would not have Pulp Fiction the movie, which I like. Don't object to it, please. You would not have Pulp Fiction the movie if you did not have Pulp Fiction, really. And I grew up also reading Mickey's Plane, I have to admit. And Angelique, women's novels, thanks to my mother's influence, I'm so glad to say. In any case, the point I'm trying to make is obvious, I think. You don't have to think of the selected books, though I think they are wonderfully selected and a great collection of books. You don't have to think of them as on a pedestal, as hermetically sealed and removed from the non-hygienic aspects of lesser people. You should, of course, question the wisdom of the idea of great books, fine. Question the okay. Question everything. and get used to, by the way, please, this is for me, this is your first semester. You have to get used to professors going over their notes and not finding their place. You should question the wisdom of the idea of great books, fine. You should question the fact that certain ones have been given such honor. But you should also realize that you cannot do it well without a proper introduction to humanity, without those analytical tools that I believe you will have an opportunity to develop in a course such as this. So, what am I saying? Last minute. Should there be a course like this, in my opinion, in the abstract world? Should there be a canon? What is the bottom line? The greatest thing about the humanities, my dear friends, is that you need to come to grips and learn to live with the fact disorienting as it may be, that there is no bottom line to many aspects of life. The fairy tale quality of papatya falı, you know, the loves me not, seviyor sevmiyor, is proverbial because it is wonderfully compact and takes into account the futility of trying the bottom line when you are dealing with matters of the heart and the imagination, even matters of the mind. There will be many aspects of your readings, no matter how seriously you apply yourselves to that reading, no matter how many other reference books you look up, no matter how enlightening your instructor, no matter how eye-opening the debate in the classroom, there will be many aspects to those readings that will look ambiguous. You will be ambivalent about it. And that's precisely the point. The humanities teach you to live with, even enjoy ambiguity and ambivalence. The gray zones in between the black and the white that you should also observe and cherish when you find it. But the whole area in between is to be assessed again and again through readings such as the ones that you have on your syllabus. So, in short, the final word, the humanities is, in my opinion, a survival. Because life is all about ambiguity and ambivalence. Thank you very much.